Mike Reuschel, who married his first wife Dee Dee Hoffman in 1979 while they were students at the University of Florida in Gainesville, was a man who seemingly had it all. From a young age, Mike displayed a remarkable set of characteristics. He was a Boy Scout who nearly attained the rank of Eagle Scout and was an altar boy, showing his moral and ethical values. Upon attending college at the University of Florida, Mike continued to thrive. He actively engaged in a fraternity, which offered him a support community and opportunities for growth and development. Furthermore, his athletic abilities and academic achievements made him an exemplary student. Mike graduated with a master's in business administration from the University of Miami. This academic achievement set him on a path of personal and professional success. Dee Dee, Mark's wife, once remarked that Mike was a genuinely supportive husband who never physically abused her. However, Mike's relationship with Dee Dee had reached a breaking point beneath the facade of success. They had 2 daughters, Caroline and Kate, whom Mike loved dearly. Despite his professional achievements, Mike was often away from his family, spending long hours traveling for work. As a result, his daughters grew accustomed to his absence during their formative years. After 25 years of marriage, Dee Dee approached Mike and requested a divorce. Dee Dee moved out of the shared residence. This arrangement was intentional, as Dee Dee wanted to give Caroline and Kate a place to return to when they returned from college. Mike found himself a single man for the first time in a long while at 49. Feeling the need to find love again, Mike decided to embark on internet dating in the mid-2000s. At this time, internet dating was gaining widespread popularity. Mike created an account on Match.com, and it wasn't long before he connected with a 38-year-old Hispanic nurse named Susan. As Mike and Susan's relationship progressed, they went on wonderful dates and trips together. Not long after their initial meeting, Susan moved into Mike's home, taking over a space once occupied by Mike's ex-wife, Dee Dee. In an interview with 48 Hours, Dee Dee shared her perspective on Susan's arrival into her ex-husband's life. According to Dee Dee, everything that was once hers suddenly became Susan's, including her dog. When she first met her father's girlfriend, Mike's daughter, Caroline, expressed her concerns about Susan. Caroline was taken aback about how much Susan drank during their first meeting. Despite consuming several martinis, Susan miraculously remained upright, able to walk, and even engage in conversation. According to Caroline, this behavior was unlike anything she had ever witnessed, and it set off alarm bells in her mind. Despite Caroline's reservations, Mike and Susan eventually tied the knot in 2007. This union marked a turning point in their relationship, as Susan stopped working and Mike ceased traveling for work. Instead, Mike purchased a local business, Ocala Dental, which would become the center of their lives. Mike Reuschel and his wife Susan appeared to be an ideal couple to the outside world. They owned a home in a wealthy Alachua County neighborhood of Hale Plantation in Florida, and they often joked about their perfect life together. However, behind their facade, Mike and Susan faced significant struggles in their marriage. During the summer of 2007, Mike drafted a prenuptial agreement with Susan. This sudden development raised eyebrows among their friends and family, as they'd always been portrayed as a strong and united couple. What prompted Mike to propose a prenup suddenly? The catalyst for Mike's decision was an incident at one of his daughter's house parties. Susan, known for her fierce temperament, used excessive profanity in front of Mike's daughter, causing a heated argument. This incident led Mike to consider protecting his assets in case of a potential divorce. Although Mike and Susan appeared to be financially stable, there were underlying issues beneath the surface. Susan admitted to Mike that she had accumulated $35,000 in credit card debt, which deeply concerned him. One of the main sources of tension in Mike and Susan's relationship was Susan's dislike of Mike's daughters. Caroline said she could only interact with her father when he was alone in his car. Susan's dislike for his daughters created a barrier, making it difficult for Caroline to have meaningful conversations with her father. Despite the difficulties they faced, Mike and Susan's relationship seemed to stabilize, at least on the surface. In 2016, when Caroline announced her engagement, Susan became deeply involved and wanted a significant role in every aspect of the wedding. Susan insisted on throwing her a bridal shower, a gesture typically reserved for the mother or sister of the bride. As Susan planned the shower, she made a conscious decision to exclude Caroline's mother's friends from the guest list. However, she ensured her friends and family were in attendance. Despite the initial strangeness of Susan's deep involvement in planning the shower, Caroline admitted that the day was enjoyable. Susan put in considerable effort to make the occasion fun and memorable for all participants. When Caroline was looking for her wedding gown, Susan accompanied her to the bridal boutique. Together, they browsed through the various dresses until Caroline found one that captured her imagination. Susan even handed over her credit card to pay for the $11,000 gown. In November 2017, Caroline married at the Oeka Castle in Long Island, surrounded by 160 guests. The event mirrored the grandeur and luxury of a wedding fit for royalty. Before Mike walked his daughter Caroline down the aisle, she noticed an unusual mark on his face. When Caroline inquired about the mark, Mike brushed her concerns aside, not wanting to upset her on this special day. However, 3 weeks after Caroline married, Mike confided in her that the mark, now a long white scar, had come at the hands of his wife, Susan. He revealed that Susan had physically abused him and that she had been arrested for domestic battery after becoming violent while intoxicated. Susan's version of the incident was that after her stepdaughter Caroline's wedding, her husband Mike confided in her that the wedding had gone $150,000 over budget. This revelation angered Susan, and the argument between her and Mike escalated. During the altercation, Susan threw a mobile phone at Mike, and she pushed him in an effort to defuse the situation. However, Susan herself was the one who eventually called 911 to report the incident. According to Susan, she offered to go to the couple's beach condo to calm things down. However, a significant amount of time passed without her leaving the residence to head to the beach. As a result, the police arrested Susan when she still had not left the premises. The court ultimately ordered Susan to stay away from Mike, and she sought alcohol and consulting services as well as anger management assistance. Several weeks later, Mike ultimately decided not to pursue charges against Susan, and the case was dropped. Susan moved out of their home and into a condo at Ponte Vedra. While this provided a reprieve from the couple's ongoing drama, it would be short-lived. On February 3, 2018, at 4 a.m., Michael Reuschel made a chilling call to 911 from his home in Gainesville, Florida. He informed the dispatcher that someone had entered his house and his wife, Susan, was bleeding profusely. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered Susan lying severely injured on a bed in the master bedroom. Medics were immediately summoned, and with a sense of urgency, they rushed her to the closest hospital. As Susan was rushed to the operating room, the surgeons worked tirelessly to save her in critical condition. The odds were not in her favor, and the possibility of survival seemed slim. Meanwhile, a detective arrived at Mike's home, now cordoned off as a crime scene. The detective began his search of the premises, meticulously examining the scene for any clues. What the detective found was a scene that sent shivers down his spine. Inside the master bedroom, there was a substantial amount of blood on the bed, as well as a bloody bent knife. However, there was no sign of forced entry on any doors or shattered windows. In an effort to piece together the events that led up to the incident, the detective obtained security camera footage from Mike's home. However, after carefully examining the footage, the detective failed to find anyone fleeing from Mike's house. Susan miraculously survived the ordeal, but was left with significant wounds on her wrist, stomach, and neck. When Susan regained consciousness in the hospital, she provided a shocking revelation to the detectives assigned to the case. According to Susan, there was no intruder. It was Mike who had attacked her. She claimed Mike had concocted a story about a person breaking into their home and assaulting them. According to Susan, she and Mike started fighting while they were at a local restaurant for dinner. Susan said that she and Mike decided to return home in separate cars. Upon arriving home, Susan went straight to bed, and as she was falling asleep, she suddenly felt a sharp stabbing sensation. When Susan opened her eyes, Mike was standing over her with a knife in his hand. Panic and confusion filled her mind as she realized that she was in danger. Susan yelled out at Mike, "Michael, you are going to kill me." To her horror, Mike replied, "That's exactly what I want to do." Susan's cries for help went unheard as Mike continued to stab her, leaving her body covered in blood and suffering immense pain. For an hour, Susan lay in the bed, bleeding profusely and fearing for her life. Mike told Susan that he wouldn't kill her if she stuck with his story that an intruder had broken into the house and stabbed her. Desperate to stay alive, Susan reluctantly agreed to go along with Mike's plan. He then changed his clothes and called 911, pretending that a robbery had taken place. Mike Reuschel was arrested on charges related to the attempted murder of his wife Susan. The news surprised everyone, including Mike's ex-wife Dee Dee, and his daughters Caroline and Kate. Dee Dee, who had divorced Mike years earlier, was in disbelief when she heard about the arrest. During their marriage, she had never witnessed any signs of violence or aggression. She couldn't comprehend the idea that her former husband was being accused of such a heinous crime. Similarly, Caroline and Kate were overwhelmed by their father's arrest. They had always admired and respected Mike, considering him a generous and kind man. The idea that he would commit such a violent act against their stepmother seemed inconceivable. As the situation unfolded, additional charges were brought against Mike. In addition to the attempted murder charge, he was indicted on charges of false imprisonment, obstruction, and tampering with evidence. These additional charges further complicated the case and increased the severity of the situation. Due to Mike's wealth and affluence, the judge decided to set a bond of $2.5 million on the additional charges. However, it was agreed that no bond would be granted on the attempted murder charge, considering the serious nature of the crime. The arrest of Mike Reuschel created shockwaves throughout the community. Many people who knew him and his family found it difficult to reconcile their perception of him with the nature of the charges he faced. Several months after his February 2018 arrest on June 29th, Mike was arrested and charged with a criminal attempt to solicit and conspire on a capital felony. The charges were based on allegations that Mike had tried to hire an inmate to murder his wife Susan. According to the state's attorney office, Mike sought assistance from 33-year-old Roderick Germain McCollum, who also faced charges in relation to the alleged murder-for-hire plot. The trial, which took place in 2019, provided insight into the tumultuous dynamics of Mike and Susan's relationship. Throughout the trial, Mike presented a narrative that depicted a strained and turbulent marriage. Mike's testimony revealed that he and his wife had limited visitors to their home. According to Mike, this restriction was primarily due to Susan's reluctance to have his friends from his former university's advisory board over. Another aspect that created friction between Mike and Susan was his philanthropic endeavors. Mike testified that he enjoyed making charitable donations, which occasionally caused contention with his wife. According to Mike, Susan would often threaten to divorce him if he attended committee meetings or country club meetings, or if he made donations without her permission. While Mike claimed to have faced conflict over charitable contributions, Susan's spending habits seemingly went unchecked. Mike testified that Susan often spent money on clothing and jewelry without consulting him. This disparity in financial properties added to the strain of their marriage, as Mike felt frustrated and overwhelmed by the constant financial strain. Mike also testified that there were times when Susan resorted to violence as a means of resolving conflicts. In a July 2016 incident, Mike claimed that Susan threw a wine bottle at him from the top of the staircase, hitting him in the shoulders. That was not an isolated incident. Mike testified that there were other occasions where Susan threw vases and heavy mugs at him. Despite numerous violent incidents, Mike told the court that he never reported any of them to police, nor did he seek help. However, Mike took pictures of his injuries and shared them with his daughter, Caroline. Mike maintained throughout the trial that despite enduring abuse, he loved his wife and wanted to remain married to her. Yet Mike stated he was walking on eggshells around her, constantly fearing retaliation. Mike invited Susan for dinner on February 3, 2018, with the hope that they could work on their relationship. He decided to take her to their favorite steakhouse, hoping that a change of scenery and a romantic dinner would foster reconciliation. During the dinner, Mike received a text message from his daughter Caroline, which angered Susan. The dinner became awkward and tense. Susan's anger escalated, and she left the restaurant in an Uber at the end of the meal. Mike followed her in his car. During the ride home, Susan sent Mike a text message that read, "Good luck with that bitch," referring to his daughter Caroline. Susan believed that Caroline would ruin any future relationship Mike had. While Susan and Mike arrived home that night, they did not communicate verbally. Instead, they continued to communicate through text message. Susan informed Mike that she was filing for a divorce and leaving the next morning. At approximately 10:13 p.m., Susan sent Mike one final text. It addressed his serious boundary issues with his daughter. According to Susan, she was alone in the guest room when Mike suddenly entered and jumped on top of her. Susan felt pressure in her upper abdomen and saw a knife in her husband's hand. She asked him whether he stabbed her, to which he admitted he had done so. Susan alleged that Mike told her that they were not getting a divorce and described a tense, violent struggle, during which her left thumb was sliced. She claimed that Mike stabbed her multiple times and slashed at her wrists. During the altercation, Susan sustained severe injuries. She testified that her blood loss was substantial, causing her to vomit and lose control of her muscles and bodily functions. Mike allegedly told Susan that he was going to lay with her until she died. Susan claimed that she was trying to stay conscious when Mike came up with the idea that an intruder had come in and attacked her. However, Mike's version of events differed greatly. Mike testified that he walked into the bedroom and found Susan on the bed holding a knife. A struggle ensued over the knife, and as they fell onto the bed, the knife fatally wounded Susan's stomach. However, Mike failed to explain how Susan was also stabbed in the neck and thumb. During the testimony, Mike claimed that he intended to call 911 for help after accidentally injuring Susan during a struggle. However, Susan allegedly told him not to do so, as she feared being arrested again for domestic violence. According to Mike, the two of them lay together as she bled for several hours. While they lay there, they had what Mike described as one of the best conversations of their lives. During the conversation, Susan and Mike discussed their future travel plans. They talked about their dream of visiting Germany, Tuscany, Florence, and Greece, and going on a river cruise. According to the prosecution, if Mike was telling the truth, He and Susan were having this conversation on a bed covered in blood, vomit, and human waste and excrement. Mike testified at 3 a.m. that he and Susan's dog Susie walked into their bloody bedroom, prompting him to get out of bed to take care of her. However, during this encounter, Susan grabbed a knife and slit her wrists, purportedly stating that she feared going to jail. He claimed to have told Susan that he was not going to get her arrested, but instead decided to lie to the police and stated that he would protect her. As a part of this plan, Mike turned off the security cameras to stage a break-in at around 5:25 a.m. However, he later called 911 and turned the cameras back on. The prosecution argued that Mike's actions indicated an intent to harm Susan. They contended that his willingness to lie about the events and his manipulation of the surveillance cameras suggested that he was attempting to cover up his involvement in the crime. On the other hand, the defense argued that Mike's actions were motivated by his desire to protect his wife. They contended that Susan's attempted suicide was a result of her mental health issues and that Mike was trying to save her from herself when he turned off the camera and lied to the police. A bloodstain pattern analyst testified on Mike's defense, stating that he had reviewed the medical records that supported Mike's story. According to the analyst, if Susan's wrist had been cut around 10 p.m., as she claimed, she would have died due to blood loss. However, if Mike's story were true, it would have made more sense that she had survived the attack, as medical help had arrived shortly afterwards. The prosecution refuted Mike's claims that he wanted to reconcile his marriage with Susan. They presented evidence that Mike had visited 3 dating sites, seemingly indicating a lack of interest in his reconciliation. However, Mike's defense countered by showing that Mike had accessed several web pages dedicated to battered husbands. After a 9-day trial, the jury went into deliberations 4 hours later. They finally returned with a verdict, finding Mike guilty of attempted first-degree murder and additional charges. In December 2019, Mike was sentenced. However, Susan did not attend the hearing. Mike's daughter, Caroline, addressed the court and expressed her pride in being her father's daughter. She mentioned that Mike had been compassionate and selfless over the years, always putting others before himself. Several friends also stepped forward to share their thoughts on Mike, describing him as a kind, gentle person and a stand-up gentleman. Despite the prosecution's request for a 50-year sentence, the judge ultimately sentenced Mike to 30 years. However, given his age at the time of the sentencing, it is likely that Mike will die in prison. Toni Berolet was the only girl born in the middle of 2 brothers. Growing up as the only girl, Toni was a tomboy, but also the perfect Southern belle. Her upbringing as the only girl in a household of boys made her independent and assertive. She could hold her own in male-dominated environments, but also exuded femininity and charm. After graduating high school, Toni pursued higher education, enrolling in college and medical school. She was a dedicated student who excelled in her studies. Toni's hard work paid off as she graduated top of her class. Throughout her life, Toni focused on her career goals as an ophthalmologist. She became a successful and respected field doctor known for her expertise and compassion. Despite her professional achievements, Toni still yearned for love and companionship. Toni married at a young age, but found that their relationship lacked chemistry and compatibility. The divorce was a difficult adjustment for Toni, as she struggled with disappointment and loneliness, using it as a distraction from the pain she felt. Over time, Toni realized it was time to give love another chance. At 30, she decided to dip her toes back into the dating pool. However, her previous experience had left her guarded and cautious. Despite her initial resistance, Toni eventually found herself opening up to the possibility of love. She allowed herself to meet new people and explore potential relationships. However, it was still not easy for her to let go of the past and embrace the idea of finding true love. Like many others, Toni believed that online dating held the key to finding her soulmate. With a strong belief in the importance of faith in her life, Toni decided to embark on a quest to find a partner who shared her beliefs. As a result, she turned to a Christian dating site. Throughout her online dating journey, Toni went on several dates with men who captured her interest. However, she found herself struggling to find that special someone who truly connected with her on a deeper level. Despite the potential connections, Toni remained hopeful that one day she would meet the love of her life. When all hope seemed lost, Toni encountered Harold Henthorn, a charming and handsome man who piqued her interest. Harold's dating profile painted a picture of a confident and successful man living in Colorado. According to his profile, he worked as a consultant at a non-profit organization. What attracted Toni to Harold the most was his genuine and heartfelt desire to find a second chance at love. He disclosed to Toni that he was a widower, having lost his first wife, Lynn, in a car accident. Harold shared with Toni that he had waited for a significant amount of time to find his happily ever after. As their online conversations continued, Harold decided to travel to Jackson, Mississippi to meet Toni in person. Upon being introduced to Toni's friends, Harold effortlessly won them over with his charismatic personality and genuine warmth. Toni's loved ones quickly realized Harold was the perfect match for their beloved friend. They noticed his outgoing nature and energy complemented Toni's reserved and quiet demeanor. From the moment she met Harold, she knew she had found her soulmate. Their relationship moved quickly, and by Valentine's Day 2000, Harold proposed to Toni with a stunning ring. Of course, Toni said yes, thrilled to have the opportunity to embark on the next chapter of her life with her Prince Charming. Less than a year after they first met, on September 30th, 2000, Toni and Harold exchanged vows in a grand church wedding in Jackson, Mississippi. Following the wedding, Toni and Harold relocated to Colorado, where Harold lived. Toni quickly established herself as an esteemed ophthalmologist, treating her patients like family. She had remarkable bedside manner, ensuring every patient felt heard, understood, and cared for. Her compassion and dedication to her craft made her an exceptional doctor. Toni's life revolved around her career as a doctor and her relationship with Harold. Together they built a beautiful home and supported each other. As time passed, Toni and Harold had a daughter, Haley, who was the light of their lives. Years passed, and Toni Henthorn and her husband Harold built a beautiful life together. Just 2 weeks before Toni and Harold's anniversary, Harold reached out to the office manager at her ophthalmology practice. The manager was eager to help. Harold requested that the office manager prepare a surprise for his wife, saying he wanted to take her to the Rocky Mountain National Park. Harold planned to take Toni away for the weekend and celebrate their 12th wedding anniversary. Knowing how much Toni loved their job and patients, the office manager kept Toni's schedule clear. On September 28, 2012, Harold arrived at Toni's office. The manager brought Toni into an exam room, thinking she would treat a regular patient. However, when Toni stepped inside, she was shocked to see her husband Harold waiting for her. Harold told Toni that he had a surprise for her. They were going away for the weekend. He assured Toni that he had already made arrangements to have a babysitter for their young daughter Haley, and packed her bag. Toni, always trusting and unsuspecting, happily agreed to the unexpected trip. As the couple embarked on their journey, Harold informed Toni that they would spend the first night at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, the inspiration for Stephen King's novel The Shining. Upon arrival at the Stanley, Harold and Toni had an early dinner and retired to their room. Harold had meticulously mapped out trails in the park for them to explore the following day. On September 29, 2012, the couple decided to embark on a trek through the picturesque Rocky Mountain National Park. The day started peacefully as Toni and Harold set out on their hike. They were excited about the breathtaking views and the prospect of a beautiful day in nature. America's national parks are known for their breathtaking landscapes and awe-inspiring beauty. However, as beautiful as these parks may be, they also hold a hidden danger. According to a study conducted by Backpacker magazine, a staggering 243 people die in national parks each year. This statistic highlights the inherent risks that come with exploring the wilderness. In Rocky Mountains National Park, where the Henthorns were planning their hike, the leading cause of death was falling. As the hours passed, the couple ventured deep into the rocky terrain. A bit before 7 p.m., Harold made a shocking call to 911. In a panicked voice, he explained to the dispatchers that Toni had fallen off the edge of a cliff and was in critical condition. The dispatcher immediately dispatched a park ranger, a trained EMT, to the scene. However, due to the treacherous terrain, the ranger needed to walk to the spot where Harold was. Harold waited on the phone with the dispatcher, his voice filled with urgency. He begged the dispatcher to send a helicopter to rescue his wife. Due to the high altitude and terrain, the dispatcher explained that a helicopter could not reach where he was. The dispatcher tried to reassure Harold that help was on the way, but Harold's desperation and fear were palpable. After a while, Harold hung up the phone on the dispatcher. He said that he feared that his cell phone battery would die, leaving him without a way to connect to the emergency services. As the ranger ventured through the park, the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. In order to make it easier for the ranger to locate him, Harold decided to start a fire. Approximately an hour after the initial call, Harold contacted the emergency services again. This time, the dispatcher attempted to guide Harold through CPR, hoping to save Toni's life. However, Harold insisted on hanging up with the dispatcher, stating that he needed to hang up the line in order to keep it free. As the ranger continued his search, the dispatcher called once more and requested Harold use his whistle so the ranger could find him. Harold blew the whistle, signaling to the ranger that he was nearby. Unfortunately, it was too late by the time the ranger and emergency services arrived. It was over 2 hours after Harold first reported Toni's fall, and Toni had already passed away. All deaths in national parks are thoroughly investigated. This case was no exception. Harold recounted to the ranger the details of the hike that led to Toni's tragic death. He stated that at 1:45 p.m., he and Toni embarked on the Deer Mountain Trail, where they decided to take a selfie. However, the trail was crowded with numerous hikers, prompting them to venture further into the woods. Harold explained that they reached their destination around 3:30 p.m. and had lunch on the mountain. During this time, he captured a photo of Toni. However, the ridge where they had stopped for lunch was too noisy for the couple to enjoy a peaceful meal. As a result, they decided to continue down the mountain in search of a secluded spot. Harold mentioned that Toni had spotted wild turkeys and wanted to get closer for a photo opportunity. Unfortunately, she fell 128 feet down the mountain while trying to capture the birds. When Harold returned home after Toni's passing, he was met with an outpouring of support from his family and friends. His daughter Haley, who was deeply affected by her mother's loss, also received a lot of love and care from everyone around her. However, amidst this outpouring of sympathy, there were whispers and rumors surrounding Toni's sudden death. Toni's friends found it peculiar that she died only 1 year after she almost lost her life in another incident. While Toni was cleaning underneath her deck 1 year earlier, Harold accidentally hit a loose beam, causing it to crash onto Toni's head. She was rushed to the hospital, but fortunately, she survived the injury. However, she was left with bruises and injuries that took some time to heal. In light of these circumstances, Toni's friends couldn't help but wonder if foul play was involved. They couldn't help but question if the accident a year earlier was accidental, or if there was more to the story. Suspicions heightened when, on the day of the funeral service, Harold seemed more interested in watching a football game rather than mourning the loss of his wife with their loved ones. The FBI became actively involved in the investigation into Toni's death. Agents with the FBI conducted interviews with the ranger who first arrived at the scene on the day Toni died. According to the ranger, there was no indication that Harold had attempted to perform CPR on his dying wife. Further investigation by the FBI uncovered additional evidence suggesting that Harold may have been involved in Toni's death. The investigators discovered that before Toni died, Harold's cell phone pinged in the area where she fell 9 times. These pings raised suspicion that the phone calls may have been part of a scouting mission to locate the ideal location to kill his wife. It wasn't long before the FBI received a call informing them that Toni was not Harold's first wife to die. This information raised suspicions about Harold's involvement in the death of his previous wife, and Toni. Lynn and Harold were married in September 1982 and lived in Colorado. On May 6, 1995, a little after 9 p.m., in the countryside of Colorado, a woman and her family were driving on Highway 67 when they saw a man in the street flagging down cars for help. It was Harold Henthorn. Harold seemed panicky and quickly approached the woman's vehicle and told them he needed their assistance. He explained that his wife, Lynn, was stuck underneath their car and was in need of help. Harold claimed that while he and his wife were fixing a flat tire, a jack gave way, trapping Lynn beneath the car. The woman and her family sprang into action, working together to lift the car off Lynn. As they did so, they noticed that her lips were blue and she was not breathing. It was a chilling sight, made worse by the chilly weather. Lynn, who was only wearing a tank top and jeans, was exposed to the elements and in desperate need of warmth. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the woman and her family took an immediate action. They began piling their coats on Lynn, hoping to keep her body temperature elevated and comfort her. Since it was the mid-1990s, there would have been no cell phones on the scene. After driving 2 miles, the woman who stopped to help Harold managed to find a house with a phone. She hurriedly made a call, alerting emergency services to the dire situation. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way, but time was of the essence. When the police officers and paramedics arrived at the scene, they administered a shot of epinephrine in an attempt to restart Lynn's heart. Fortunately, their efforts were successful, and Lynn's heart began to beat once again. She was then transported to a nearby hospital for further medical attention. Unfortunately, despite the initial progress, Lynn passed away at the age of 37. As Lynn was being treated, one of the EMTs attempted to gather information from Harold. However, Harold appeared evasive in his answers and continually moved away from the medic, hindering their efforts to gain the necessary information. The medic noticed that Harold's behavior seemed strange, as he did not feel urgent or desperate for his wife to receive assistance. From observing Harold's actions, the medic came to the conclusion that Harold's demeanor did not seem consistent with someone deeply concerned about his wife's well-being. It seemed as if Harold was reluctant to allow any assistance to reach her. This behavior raised suspicions and made the medic question Harold's intentions. When the medics were able to restart Lynn's heart, Harold acted shocked, maybe even disappointed. Despite freezing outside, Harold did not remove his jacket and place it on his injured wife. This behavior puzzled the medic, as they expected him to prioritize his wife's comfort. However, the onlookers at the scene seemed more interested in helping Lynn than her husband. This discrepancy furthered the medic's confusion. An autopsy was conducted on Lynn's body, and it was discovered that she had died from asphyxiation. This finding prompted an investigation into her untimely death. However, a few days later, the medical examiner ruled her death accidental and closed the case. At the time, no one had any reason to suspect that Lynn's death was not as straightforward as it seemed. The case appeared closed, and it seemed no foul play was involved. Detectives investigating Toni's death in 2012 hired a private investigator to look into Lynn's death several years earlier. The private investigator's investigation revealed that Harold provided various accounts regarding the cause of Lynn's entrapment under the car. To some people, Harold stated that Lynn was searching for a lug nut at the time of the accident. However, to others, he claimed she went under the car to retrieve a flashlight she had accidentally dropped. Furthermore, Harold's accounts differed regarding where they were headed when the incident occurred. In some cases, he claimed they were about to head out for dinner, while in others, he stated that they had already eaten and were on their way home. Over the years, the private investigator discovered that Harold had also told different stories regarding Lynn's death. Harold told one person that the trunk of the car fell on Lynn's neck, breaking it and killing her, and told people at his church his first wife died of cancer. One of the detectives approached one of Harold's first wife's, Lynn's best friend, with a proposition. They asked if she would be willing to wear a wire and approach Harold to obtain incriminating information. Initially, the friend was hesitant to agree to the request, as she believed Harold was innocent. They had been friends for many years, and she trusted his character. However, the friend decided to take the matter to her pastor to seek guidance. The pastor advised her that if Harold was truly innocent, her involvement could prove it. This realization weighed heavily on the friend's mind, and she decided to reconsider her initial refusal. After careful consideration, the friend eventually agreed to meet with Harold and wear a wire during their conversation. However, during the meeting, a technical glitch occurred in the wiring system, causing disruptions in the recording. The friend realized that she needed to take action discreetly. She discreetly excused herself from the conversation and made her way to the bathroom, where an officer was waiting to assist her. The friend observed that Harold never explicitly denied killing his first wife, Lynn, or his second wife, Toni. However, Harold never admitted to the killings either. Despite the lack of a confession, the friend did not believe that Harold was capable of murder. Over time, however, the friend's perspective began to change. She began to suspect that neither of Harold's wives had died accidentally. As the investigation into Toni's death progressed, the FBI learned that Harold had presented himself as a fundraiser for nonprofit organizations. He had claimed that he regularly went on business trips, insisting that these trips were integral to his work. However, upon closer inspection, the agents discovered none of these claims were true. They were unable to locate any tax returns, pay stubs, or any other evidence that Harold had a job since 1995. Further investigation revealed that Harold's weekly business trips were spent at a local Panera Bread outlet. The agents discovered his location through surveillance footage, which showed him surfing the internet during his supposed work trips. This revelation cast doubt on Harold's credibility and raised suspicion about his activities. On November 6, 2014, 2 years after the death of Toni in Rocky Mountain National Park, Harold was arrested and charged with Toni's murder. Harold pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. Toni's family sought custody of Haley, Toni's daughter, but Harold, who was in jail at the time, refused to allow it. As a result, Haley was placed in the care of her godparents in Colorado for the time being. 10 months after Harold was arrested, he went on trial in 2015 for the murder of his second wife, Toni. Despite the absence of forensic evidence linking him to her death, the prosecution presented various pieces of evidence to strengthen their case. Firstly, the prosecution presented evidence that Harold had taken out several life insurance policies on Toni. This, they argued, suggested premeditation on his part, as he had planned to kill his wife and profit from her death. Furthermore, the prosecution presented evidence of pings in the area several weeks prior to Toni's death. These pings suggested that Harold was actively seeking a location where he could carry out his sinister plan without attracting attention. Additionally, the prosecution presented a map found in Harold's car, marked with a giant X on the spot where Toni fell from the cliff. This, they claimed, further solidified their theory that Harold had selected this location in order to carry out his nefarious plan. However, the most compelling evidence presented by the prosecution was the death of Harold's first wife, Lynn, and the suspicions surrounding it. The similarities between Lynn's death and Toni's, according to prosecution, were striking. The jury believed that Harold exhibited a pattern of behavior that led them to convict him. After a 10-day trial, the jury retired for deliberation. The jury ultimately returned with a guilty verdict, finding Harold guilty of murdering his second wife, Toni. They found that there was a pattern of similarities between the deaths of Lynn and Toni, which led them to believe that Harold was responsible. As a result, Harold was sentenced to life in prison, where he will reside for the rest of his natural life. Although Harold was never formally charged with the murder of his first wife, Lynn, it is widely accepted that he is also responsible for her death. In December 2015, Toni's oldest brother was granted custody of her and Harold's daughter Haley. In 2023, Harold Henthorn appealed his conviction, but it was ultimately dismissed. Additionally, he filed a motion for post-conviction relief, alleging ineffective assistance by his defense attorney. Harold contended that his attorney's performance during the trial failed to meet constitutional standards. He argued that his defense attorney did not prepare an adequate defense for him. However, Harold's request for relief was also denied. Despite his claim of inadequate representation, the court determined that his defense attorney had provided an adequate defense, meeting the constitutional standards required for a fair trial. Harold's story is a stark reminder of the dangers posed by people whom society labels as charming or grooming. His ability to charm and deceive those around him highlights the importance of being vigilant and suspicious when dating or entering into a relationship with someone. This case serves as a cautionary tale for individuals who find themselves in similar situations. It encourages them to exercise caution and seek support from trusted individuals. Harold Henthorn's chilling story reminds us of the consequences of falling victim to manipulation and the destructive power of greed. Megan Verikas was born and raised in Pittsburgh in a solid, loving family. Her parents were married for over 30 years, and Megan wanted a love like theirs one day. When Megan was in her 20s, she married, but unfortunately she and her husband drifted apart and divorced. This experience left Megan disillusioned and unwilling to embark on a new relationship. However, fate had a different plan for her. In the winter of 2014, Leon checked into a hotel downtown Pittsburgh, where Megan worked as a manager. Initially, she was not impressed by Leon's arrogance and apparent disregard for others. However, Leon's charm and persuasive tactics eventually wore down Megan's defenses. Against her better judgment, Megan decided to give Leon a chance. They started dating. Leon showered Megan with attention and affection, and she found herself falling for him. From an affluent and wealthy family, Leon attended an elite boarding school as a boy and teenager. He later became a transplant surgeon and achieved great success in his career. Like Megan, Leon faced challenges in his love life, as he was in the midst of a divorce when they first met in 2014. However, as Megan and Leon's relationship progressed, their connection deepened, and they discovered mutual attraction. Leon made Megan believe that she deserved the best that life had to offer. Eventually, Leon made the decision to move back to his hometown of Houston and asked Megan if she would be willing to accompany him. Although she loved her life in Pittsburgh, Megan was ready for this change and eager to take the next step in her relationship with Leon. Upon her arrival in Houston, Megan began looking for a job and found it working as a sales agent in a local hotel. The experience allowed her to explore a new city and develop her independence. Megan rented an apartment in Houston after she and Leon relocated there. Leon moved in with her, and shortly after, they opened a joint bank account. This step was significant for Megan. It made her feel their relationship was moving quickly. As a self-reliant woman, she initially struggled with sharing finances with someone. However, a part of her saw this as a sign of Leon's care and potential future for the two of them as a couple. When Megan met Leon's family, they instantly hit it off. Megan found herself envisioning Leon as her future husband. Despite living far away from her family and friends in Pittsburgh, Megan thrived in Houston. She made new friends and adopted a dog, which brought joy to her life. Online, Megan and Leon projected an image of the perfect relationship. They shared photos of their adventures, romantic dinners, and moments of happiness. However, what was seemingly perfect on the outside began to reveal cracks on the inside. Leon found himself unable to practice medicine in Texas as he did not have the license to do so. This setback significantly hindered his career aspirations as a transplant surgeon. Leon felt undervalued and discouraged by the perceived demotion from being a surgeon to a mere surgeon's assistant. He refused to accept the role, finding it beneath his acquired skills and knowledge. As time went on, the strain caused by Leon's inability to practice medicine began to take a toll on their relationship. Megan, who had sacrificed her independence for the relationship, found herself feeling disillusioned and misunderstood. The cracks in their relationship grew deeper, and it became clear that their paths were diverging. While Megan still clung to hope for their shared future, Leon's unwavering dissatisfaction with his current situation made it increasingly difficult to reconcile their differences. Instead of actively looking for a job, Leon chose to rely on Megan's income to support their household. This burden placed immense pressure on Megan. With the added responsibility of breadwinner, Megan's frustration began to mount. She felt a growing resentment towards Leon as she realized she was shouldering most of the financial burden. The constant pressure of being the responsible one in the relationship took a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. In a moment of frustration and anger, Megan expressed her frustrations with Leon in front of his family. This impulsive decision turned out to be a misstep, as it only heightened tensions within the couple's relationship. Upon returning to their apartment, Leon's anger escalated, resulting in an outburst of violence that left Megan in a state of shock. Leon's violent behavior reached its peak when he tore through Megan's closet and hurled all of her clothing items off the balcony. This act of destruction left Megan feeling violated and helpless. She was unable to comprehend the situation. Over time, Leon's anger towards Megan escalated from verbal insults to physical abuse. He exhibited a pattern of behavior that included throwing the glass bottle he used to spit tobacco at Megan, humiliating her and calling her awful, demeaning names. The abuse seemed to be becoming more and more frequent, leaving Megan in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Despite the abusive behavior, Leon often expressed remorse and professed his love for Megan. He would claim that she was the only thing that brought him happiness, and that he was sorry for his actions. However, these apologies were short-lived, and the cycle of abuse continued to repeat itself, leaving Megan feeling trapped and alone. On January 12, 2017, Megan returned home after a long day of work at the hotel to find Leon in a bad mood. Frustrated by some unknown reason, Leon threw a glass of wine at Megan. After enduring years of abuse, Megan had reached her breaking point. She decided to confront Leon and put an end to the toxic relationship. Megan, done with the cycle of abuse, approached Leon and told him that she was leaving him. Determined to make her escape, she packed her bag and prepared to leave. However, Leon was not about to let her go without a fight. As Megan started to walk away with her suitcase in tow, Leon stormed into the bedroom and approached her. With his hands covering her face, he tried to physically restrain her from leaving. Terrified by Leon's behavior, Megan found herself trapped. She knew the situation was escalating and had to make immediate action to escape. In desperation, Megan grabbed her dog and rushed out of the bedroom. Leon pursued her as she ran down the driveway, pulling on the car door to stop her. With determination, Megan closed the door and escaped into the vehicle. As Megan tried to drive away, Leon continued to chase her, determined to prevent her from leaving. Frustrated and angry, he threatened to break the window of the car if she didn't open it. Terrified for her safety, Megan refused to comply and continued to drive away, putting as much distance between herself and her abuser as possible. The following day, as Megan reported to work at the hotel, it was evident that she had been crying. Her concerned friends and coworkers noticed the change in her demeanor and approached her seeking answers. When prodded, she broke down into tears and spoke about the abuse she had been experiencing at Leon's hands. Megan's friends and coworkers were shocked to hear the truth about her situation. Throughout the day, Leon kept contacting Megan through various means, sending her erratic messages. In some of the messages, he would profess his love and express his remorse, indicating his desire to propose. However, Leon would abruptly declare that he was done with her and others. As the day progressed, Megan grew tired of Leon's constant badgering and requested that he leave her alone. However, to her dismay, she discovered that he had drained their bank account. Upon returning home to their shattered apartment, Megan was horrified to discover all her furniture was gone. Fortunately, she had managed to reach home before Leon had the chance to dispose of her clothes and personal possessions. Megan quickly headed to the police station to file a report against Leon, accusing him of assault. She also applied for a protective order, but the process took some time. Several days later, as Megan was leaving her apartment for work, she glanced in her rearview mirror and saw Leon behind her. Panic-stricken, she sped through the city trying to lose him. However, Leon was determined to keep following her. He cut Megan off, forcing her to stop abruptly. Leon got out of his car, and as he approached Megan, telling her she was making a mistake for leaving him, she swerved her car and managed to escape. Leon's actions were so disruptive that the hotel she worked at banned him from the property. However, Leon's determination to pursue Megan led him to lurk outside the building, causing unease among her colleagues and friends. One of Megan's friends took it upon themselves to confront Leon, chasing him across the street and yelling at him to leave Megan alone. The harassment continued, and Leon's persistence ultimately led to his arrest for assault. However, he was out of jail the very next day. Despite legal consequences, Leon's behavior did not deter him. Megan was forced to appear in court 2 weeks after his arrest with Leon. During this court appearance, the judge granted Megan an order of protection against Leon. Valerie McDaniel, a successful veterinarian in Houston, was sitting in the gallery, observing Leon's court appearance. After 19 years of marriage, she was divorced from her husband, Mac. Megan and Valerie had always been friendly with one another, but their bond deepened when Valerie was going through a difficult time in her divorce from Mac. Over bottles of wine and martinis, Valerie confided in Megan, and the two formed a strong connection. After Megan found out Valerie was on Leon's side in the court, she was completely stunned. What shocked Megan even further was the discovery that Valerie had played a role in posting Leon's bail. According to the bail bondsman, Leon had asked for his assistance in securing another client named Zach. He informed the bail bondsman that he had given Zach a significant amount of money to handle a problem. Leon's exact words were, "She's got to be out of the picture. I can't have her come to court and testify against me." The bail bondsman found Leon's words to be scary, as they raised suspicions about the possibility of Leon hiring someone named Zach to murder a witness in a case against Leon. Given his close friendship with the local city council person and the Houston police chief, he decided to reach out to them and share his concerns. By the end of February 2017, Megan finally felt a sense of safety, having left Leon behind and obtained a protective order. However, this sense of security was short-lived, as she was contacted by a detective who informed her about a credible threat to her life. Unsure of what to make of this information, Megan met with the detectives the following day, wearing a wig, hat, and sunglasses as a precaution. The detectives informed her about the tip they had received, informing her that they needed to surround her with police until the threat against her was taken care of. They advised her to go to Pittsburgh for safety. Megan packed a bag and left Texas right away. The detectives with the Harris County District Attorney's Special Crimes Bureau were tasked with the investigation of Leon Jacob and the alleged murder-for-hire plot. As they delved deeper into the case, they discovered a surprising fact about Leon. He was a doctor. This revelation surprised the detectives, as professionals such as doctors are not usually seen involved in criminal activities. While searching for the person Leon had mentioned working alongside him, the detectives were able to uncover Zach's identity. However, what they found was that Zach was Motaz Azah, or Taz for short. After interviewing Taz, the detectives discovered he was not a hitman, but knew Leon. Taz admitted Leon had approached him with a request to eliminate his ex-girlfriend, Megan. However, Taz clarified that he had never intended to harm Megan and merely sought the financial gain that came with the job. Taz divulged to the detectives that Leon had been in frequent contact with him, as Leon was still insistent on having the job completed. The detectives then approached Taz with an offer to work with them to capture Leon, and Taz agreed to aid in the effort. With Taz's cooperation, the detectives were closer to bringing Leon to justice. Their efforts were focused on apprehending Leon and preventing any danger to Megan, while also ensuring the safety of everyone involved in the investigation. Leon and Valerie met Taz several days later at a local Olive Garden. They were accompanied by a man named Adam, who was introduced to them as a potential hitman. Little did Leon and Valerie know that Adam was actually an undercover police officer. During their conversation, Leon mentioned some ideas about how to take out his ex-girlfriend Megan. One of his suggestions was to have the hitman give her a lethal injection of potassium chloride, which would stop her heart. Leon believed this method would be untraceable, making it less likely that the police would suspect foul play. Leon also divulged that Valerie, a veterinarian, had access to this drug through her clinic, and suggested that Valerie could provide it to the hitman, making it easier for him to carry out his plan. Leon made it clear that Megan was not the only person he wanted out of the picture. He had additional targets in mind, and seemed eager to involve Taz and Adam in his schemes. According to Leon, Valerie's ex-husband Mac was the worst person he had ever met. Leon expressed his desire to eliminate Mac as well. Valerie approached Adam, the undercover officer, and confided in him about her situation. She told him Mac was planning to take her daughter away. Detectives working on the case approached Megan and Mac and asked them to participate in a fake abduction and murder. Their objective was to create a staged crime scene and take photos so the undercover officer could show Leon and Valerie. Reluctantly, Megan and Mac agreed to cooperate. In order to make Mac appear as though he had been executed inside his car, the detectives covered him in pig's blood. Recognizing Leon's profession as a doctor, the detectives took extra measure to ensure Mac's appearance was as convincing as possible. They carefully staged his scenario to make it appear as if he had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head. Meanwhile, the detectives opted for a kidnapping scenario for Megan's situation. They zip-tied her hands and feet, securing her tightly, and covered her mouth with duct tape. Throughout this process, Megan became increasingly panicked and cried, realizing the man she intended to spend her life with had paid someone to murder her. The staged situation became all too real for her, as she realized she was now a pawn in the detective's plan to catch Leon and get him arrested. After the staged photos, Adam, the undercover officer, texted and called Leon to inform him that he had taken care of Mac. He then proceeded to show Leon the images he had captured. The undercover officer then revealed that Megan had been kidnapped, but unfortunately, there was no reason with her. Further, the undercover officer expressed that Megan was unwilling to leave the state and stop pursuing charges against Leon. As a result, the undercover officer concluded that he would have to kill her in order to resolve the situation. Several hours later, the police arrived at Valerie's apartment with their body cam footage rolling. The officers informed Valerie, who was there with Leon, that they were there to tell her that her ex-husband Mac had been killed. However, the officers knew it was all part of a ruse and Mac was safe. After the officers told Valerie and Leon the news, they tried to feign surprise. Without prompting, Leon said he and Valerie had been home with Valerie's daughter all day, providing an alibi even though no one questioned him. Leon's statement seemed rehearsed and suspicious. Leon and Valerie were arrested for solicitation to commit capital murder. The officers who arrested the couple revealed that Mac and Megan had not been killed and were both alive and well. Leon pleaded not guilty. 3 days after Valerie was arrested, she was released on a $50,000 bond. Many of Valerie's friends believed that she would never have ordered a hit on her ex-husband if Leon Jacob had not influenced her. According to her friends, she wanted love and attention, and Leon used his predatory ways to brainwash her. Valerie's friends believed Leon manipulated and used her for his own gain. They thought Leon's power and control over Valerie led her to commit the crime she was arrested for. Valerie's friends described her as a loving and caring person who was always willing to help others. Her loved ones expressed shock at the idea that she would do anything to harm her ex-husband or his loved ones. They said that Valerie's desire for love and attention blinded her to the consequences of her actions. According to Valerie's friends, Leon was a controlling and manipulative individual. Valerie's friends said he often used his charm and charisma to get what he wanted, including manipulating those around him. They believed that Leon was controlling Valerie's emotions and actions to ensure he got what he wanted. 2 weeks after Valerie's release on bail, she took her life by jumping off the balcony of her 7th floor apartment. She was due to appear in court the following day. Before Valerie took her life, she recorded a video on her iPad, telling her side of the story regarding the murder-for-hire plot that led to her arrest. In the recordings, Valerie asserted that the police entrapped her and that she had never intended to harm Mac, her ex-boyfriend, and the father of her daughter. As the news of Valerie's death spread, her loved ones were shocked. When Leon, her incarcerated lover, learned about her death, his attorney stated that he was devastated. Leon viewed Valerie as a wife and had asked the judge to allow him to attend her funeral. However, his request was denied. In 2018, Leon Jacob went on trial for solicitation to commit capital murder. The defense argued that Leon did not mean to hire a hitman to murder Megan, but rather hired a private investigator to help the couple reunite. They claimed that Leon was not attempting to harm her. However, the prosecution refuted Leon's claims and presented recordings to the jury where he suggested killing Megan with an injection of potassium chloride. Additionally, graphic staged crime scene photos depicting Megan and Mac as would-be victims were shown in court. Ultimately, Leon was found guilty of 2 counts of solicitation to commit capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison and ordered to pay a fine of $10,000.